I think LMI has been crucial in where our state is going.
This work resonates with people, and watching LMI grow, it tells me that we're really on to something.
What we're challenging you to do or think about here is to push the boundaries of the decision-making box and to think about how to make the process of prioritization both more inclusive and more relevant to the people in our organizations.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar with the California Labor Management Initiative. We're excited to have you join us to be here today. We're running this through Zoom as a Zoom meeting, so please keep your sound muted as we roll through this. We'll have a number of opportunities to connect, and without taking up too much time here, I just wanted to quickly turn this over to my colleague, Gustavo Morales, who is going to be giving us some information today and getting us started.
Thanks, Ed. So I just want to welcome everybody. We're doing a CalMI webinar series in order to still get people together. I know times are weird and times are uncertain, but we wanted to still provide you with enough resources through a CalMI webinar series, about an hour each month, where we introduce a topic or a resource to you. So today we're really happy to welcome Ellen and Michael from HMA Strategies, and we are looking forward to introducing them in just a second. Before we get started, we wanted to talk a little bit about the tech issues. So if we invite you to use the chat, so go ahead and put any questions in the chat, and you can see I'm fiddling with some new features. So Ed and I are learning some new ways to engage, so you can see the scroller down below. So again, we invite you to say where you're from and your role in the chat, and use the opportunity to add any questions as well. We're going to have Q&A at the end, around 10 minutes before we end. So we'll have an opportunity to ask Ellen and Michael questions. In addition, we have Jessie in the background. Jessie, she's going to be able to answer any chat questions, any tech questions. So if you have any questions for Jessie, you can ask them in the chat and she'll help you along. Again, don't forget to mute yourself along the way. We're trying to build out some breakout rooms, so that's why we didn't use the webinar feature in Zoom. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Gustavo. And yeah, we're excited to have a chance for you all to interact. You'll have a couple of points in the course of this hour where you'll randomly be in small groups with other education leaders around the state in order to kind of give us some feedback, let us know your thoughts on some prompt questions. We have some new tools, some new things that we think you'll find useful in all of your work. And so we're going to start off. We know that we've got some folks that have been with us for years. We also have some people that are maybe joining us for the first time. So we're going to give you kind of a quick overview of the Labor Management Initiative and some background and some new materials that we have available. So I just wanted to start off by kind of giving us some context. The California Labor Management Initiative is a project of the CDE Foundation, which is a nonprofit which works with the California Department of Education. And we're both a fiscal receiver and run a variety of projects, one of which is the California Labor Management Initiative. I think what's unique about the LMI is it really offers a safe space for convening administrators, union leaders, classified and certificated, board members. It's an opportunity for us to really think reflectively, think about what we can do to improve systems outcomes and make a difference for students across California. So in the past couple of years, since we started in 2015, we have engaged over 170 districts and county offices around the state, and we have learned a lot in that process. We're really appreciative of your participation, and we're also able to bring together this group to look at research, to look at best practices, to share what works and what doesn't in this very challenging time. And we certainly are in probably the most challenging time of anybody's career. So again, thank you for being with us. And I want to bring this slide up. I think some of you may have seen it before. This actually comes to us from a document, kind of a booklet actually that NEA put together called Collaborating for Student Success. And this is really kind of a description of, essentially labor relations, which range anywhere from, very adversarial and, strikes, lockouts, all of that, through more of a, middle ground where people are partnering to some extent, but the trust is, kind of comes and goes and people are pretty wary about each other, all the way up to partner in the blue. And, as an aside, yes, there is a color coding that's purely coincidental because this doesn't even come out of California, but those colors might be recognizable as part of the California dashboard. So what we want people to recognize out of all of this, frankly, is just that, different folks in your organization are going to have different perceptions of where you are on this continuum. You're going to move in and out, right? There are going to be times when you're working really well together and times when it feels like things are falling apart. And when we're in this difficult situation right now, sometimes it's going to feel like things are falling apart. But also to know that you're not locked into one of these columns here. You're not, sort of stuck in these individual, dynamics. If we're intentional, if we work thoughtfully together, we can move toward a more effective partnership, which has better outcomes for students and staff. So as we look at some of the ways that, we have seen work effectively to actually make that happen, right? Because this doesn't just happen, accidentally. You have to be very intentional about it. We have seen a couple of structures that we think are important for people to consider using. Hopefully some of you already have some of these structures if you've been working with us for a while, which include things like a district learning team. And sometimes that's referred to as, it might be the superintendent's extended cabinet, right? Which is the superintendent's cabinet with union leadership there, meeting regularly, meeting to talk about initiatives, issues, things that are coming up. And that can get mirrored at the school site level in school learning teams, which look like the principal and building reps meeting regularly, talking about what's working and what's not, and feeding up through grade level teams, et cetera. It creates kind of a up and down flow of information and insight into the system. This collaborative structure comes from us from Dr. Patrick Dolan's research and the Consortium for Educational Change. So one of the things that we also want to touch on, and actually this is also out of that NEA resource, Collaborating for Student Success, is what you see and what the research shows, and this comes out of research from thousands of educators across multiple states, in low collaboration settings where you don't have a lot of partnership, you don't have a lot of communication, low collaboration, usually your union leaders are spending most of their time talking about grievance issues. And while that's an important role and that's part of what they do, we know that in high collaboration settings where there is a lot more communication, a lot more partnership, the role of the union rep changes to include, right? There's still grievances may still be a part of it, but also communicating about school improvement, thinking about educator voice, shared decision-making, helping to be a driver in how we improve systems, outcomes for students, outcomes for staff. Let's go on to one other thing we're real excited to share. This is new for us. We've started to do these district spotlight stories. Really appreciate the collaboration with a great education policy researcher in California, Julie Kopic. And our first one, and you can find this on our district, on the LMI website, features Dinuba Unified, which is a district in the Central Valley. I would encourage you to take a look at the document. You'll see it, there's a link there, a bit.ly you can click on if you can copy that, or just go to the LMI website. And I think what's powerful about this is a story of a district that went from pretty toxic labor relations to a real different partnership mode, which has really impacted student achievement, staff retention, and a variety of things. That we encourage you to take a look at that. So without spending a whole lot more, because I want to get to our presenters here, I want to give a little introduction to our webinar presenters today, Michael Butler and Ellen Pace with HMA Community Partners. HMA has been working with us for over 4 years. They produced and facilitated the Labor Management Initiative strategic plan. They've worked with county offices for dealing with labor relations, and as a facilitator for the LMI. They've worked with school districts building LCAPs. They also work with social service agencies, other public agencies and nonprofits. And so we appreciate their, being a resource and their insight into the work. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Michael and Ellen.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much, Ed and Gustavo, for inviting us. I am going to go to my share screen here. And we'll get started. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to spend this hour with you, sharing ideas really for how to energize ourselves and our teams in ways that strengthen labor management partnerships and create much more effective organizations and teams, especially in these moments of uncertainty and chaos and craziness. So what are we going to do today? I want to just say that LMI is really founded on the belief and the data that people working together toward a common purpose can achieve greater outcomes for students and for the adults that are working with them. But today we don't really want to spend the time making the case for collaboration because you already believe that. Today we want to further the ideas for how your group, little ideas, big ideas, and strategies for how your group can improve your working relationship and be better at what you do. So we're going to share some big ideas and big steps. We want to talk about how to balance your process for prioritization. And we want to really consider the psychological safety of the environment that we are all working in. We know everybody is busy. And we recognize that we're all bombarded by the latest shiny object and tool that will help us do our work better. So we're not going to give you a specific tool like that today. We're not going to give you specific instructions. We want to give you an intermediate step that's going to help you think differently and be more intentional about the work that you do. In particular, we want to offer guiding questions that can help you think about how you, as a team leader, whether your team is the district learning team, the team is your union team, the team is your school team, how you all can be more effective at building the skills necessary to get the work done in a better, more effective, more efficient, more trusting, more collaborative way. And I will suspect that some of the things that we're going to talk about today can even help you with that team that you're stuck at home with, working with every single day also. So none of this happens without intentionality. And we want to start first by refreshing some of the basic skills, the basic principles of LMI. There are three main pillars of what a collaborative work environment requires: trust, equity, and communication.
Hello, everyone. So what you see here on the slide is a distillation of some research that has been done or led by Saul Rubenstein at Rutgers University, as well as some colleagues at Cornell and other places, based on more than 6 states, dozens of school districts where they've done a lot of research. And this is what they find when labor management collaboration is at a high level and it's healthy. These are the kinds of things that result. So we build on this research base, and we know that this is what happens when we see things really come together. And so today we're going to talk about how we might maximize that and a framework for getting there. If you have been to some previous LMI events, you've probably seen or heard reference to this. This comes from some research by Andy Hargraves, who's Australian and has worked very closely with Michael Fullan, which you probably know has helped be an architect of some of the systems in California as an advisor. And this is called the quadrants of collaboration. So it's an important framework because what it shows is that collaboration or partnership is really a function of precision on the vertical axis and trust on the horizontal axis. In other words, we want to bring together both precision and trust in order to maximize how people work together. Now, the funny thing about this is we have a lot more control over precision. You know, we can be very clear about what we want people to collaborate on. And we have to accept the fact that trust is earned, trust is built, and trust is ultimately experiential. So we can provide opportunities for people to build trust, and we can, you know, create conditions that are maybe more conducive towards it, but we have less overt control. So the point of this framework is that ultimately we want to be getting into that upper right-hand quadrant of collaborative professionalism, where we maximize both precision about what the heck are we coming together for, as well as the trust that makes it long-lasting and sustainable. And if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes our collaboration falls short. It either remains at the informal level, particularly at school sites, but even in district offices and county offices of education, where people get along with one another, but aren't really clear about what they're supposed to be collaborating on. Or they're given a task and told, this is what you're going to collaborate on, but there isn't a whole lot of trust that's built. And so we don't get beyond a kind of superficial or contrived level of collegiality. So this is also a piece that we're trying to build on and make sure that as you come together in your teams, that you are pushing towards that collaborative professionalism, and we're going to give you a framework for doing so.
So I'm glad you mentioned honest, Michael, because at this moment, as Simon Breakspear talked about in his recent webinar with LMI, this really is a moment where things have been laid bare, where we're able to see in very stark relief the positives and the negatives of how our education systems are working. And so we have an opportunity to reconsider what is important and how do we want to move forward, both looking at the strengths and then changing what really may not be so effective. For example, I suspect that everyone on this webinar can think of something that was a surprise success in your district when this pandemic started. Perhaps it's a story about the quick and effective way that everyone responded to the technology needs of students and staff. But I suspect as well that every district can tell a story about the stark truths of things that aren't working so well. Things that you probably knew were not as effective as you wanted them to be or as they needed to be before the pandemic started. And the pandemic has really given us an opportunity to see in full strength where all of the deficiencies are. But where do you start? How do you move forward? How do you decide what is the most pressing? How can you solve more than one problem at a time? How can you integrate into your work environment the collaborative structures that bring labor and management together, teachers and classified, service providers and administrators? How do we bring them together to the table effectively so everyone can row together to address what's been exposed? The guiding questions that we are going to talk about today will help you find the answers that are unique to your district.
So the title of this presentation was around prioritization in a time of uncertainty. So let's talk a little bit about prioritization. We know that we can't do it all at once, and we know that we have to make some decisions about what to prioritize and what takes second or third place. And how we engage in that process of prioritization matters a lot and has some big impacts on the outcomes. So we're going to take a step back and we're going to talk about different styles of decision making that are both individual and also present at the team level. So sometimes we have an individual or a team that is a quick decider, meaning that they value action and having something that they can point to tangibly and say, all right, we know what we're doing. And that's a great thing to have because action does matter, but sometimes it can result in ready, shoot, aim. You know, we can make decisions that are not the most thoughtful. Sometimes we have analytic deciding that takes control. So this is where people are trying to make the connections and seeing the interdependence between things. And connections matter a lot, but they also run the risk of delay and procrastination because it takes a while for the connections to form in a group. Sometimes we have people who are the inquisitive deciders. These are the people who ask a million questions and want to have all their questions addressed before they proceed. And they're asking hard questions about details because that's what matters to them. And those are very important for operationalizing and implementing something, but not every decision can answer every question before it gets going. And sometimes we just have to kind of, not map it A to Z, but map it A to H and then jump in and realize we're going to be making decisions on the fly in real time. And lastly, we have the inclusive deciders. These are the people where it's all about process. It's all about making sure that people feel good about the decisions, and making sure that people are comfortable with the decisions that are being made. And process really matters, and being inclusive and making sure that people feel good is great. But again, sometimes it substitutes for action. So the point that we're trying to raise here is that every type that's listed here has both an upside and a downside. And every one of these, in any size group, you're going to have people that represent at least 2 or 3 or all 4 of these. So we really feel that balance is important, and balance is almost inevitable, but you have to be intentional about that. You need to be aware, if you're a quick decider, that you need to pay attention to the process person, because they will counterbalance your demand for action with making sure people feel good about the action we're taking.
What we want to introduce today is a way to approach decision-making towards sustainable action. So we all approach our work in different ways, but there's similar processes that are required to go from an idea to building an enduring system. Michael and I make a good team because we approach our work really differently. I'm the really big thinker, and Michael's really good with details. And at the end of the day, though, it doesn't matter. We still have to go through these steps to be able to move the work that we want to do. So we recognize that frameworks are great guides to moving your work. A PDSA cycle, or a plan, do, study, act cycle, is an example of a way that people organize intentional planning to action work. And the reality is, as we said, everything starts with an action, and then you build out the work that you're going to do, and then you try to embed it into your system. And what we're trying to talk about today with LMI is how to be more intentional about how we do that include the conditions of our work and the participants of the whole organization in some fashion or another in our decisions. So we're going to lay out these steps. We call them our steps to sustainable action. They are sequential. They add on from one to the next. But each step doesn't necessarily require the same level of effort for every activity or problem you're trying to solve. So today we want to just familiarize you with these 6 layers. First, identifying the issue. After you identify an issue, what is the authority to act? And what is the urgency to act? Then, once you've clarified what the scope is of what you can do, how do you test your ideas? How do you get that work started? And then how do you identify the effectiveness of what you've been doing? How do you integrate communication into the process of what you're doing so that you really are bringing everyone along? And lastly, how do you build changes within your system and your structure so that what you're doing doesn't get shifted with every change in staff, every change in administrator, every new idea that comes along doesn't upset the entire structure of what you've done, but rather helps you make shifts and adjustments to the system that you're building. We're going to give you a set of guiding questions for each of these steps so that you can think more deeply about the work that you're doing. We all know these basics. What we want you to do is to refine what you're doing. And so during this brief time together today, we're going to walk through 5 of these steps. We're going to save communication for another day and hope you get the idea of what this is about. All right, Michael, let's get started.
So the first 2 steps, the identifying the issue and clarifying authority and urgency to act. So our premise here is that, as educators, sometimes our priorities are given to us, but a lot of times our priorities are really how we default to how it's always been done. In the work that I've done with schools and school district, I remember hearing a phrase, the nostalgic gravity of the status quo. And what that means is gravity is an immense force and it forces things downward and we don't always get to put into play what we want to do. What we're challenging you to do or think about here is to push the boundaries of the decision-making box, to not think outside the box, but push the box outward, right? And to think about how to make the process of prioritization both more inclusive and more relevant to the people in our organizations. And that way, we're hoping that we would enhance the functioning of teams. Since we're going to spend a lot of time in meetings kind of coming up with what our priorities, let's make this time as valuable as possible and as responsive as possible. The second thing that we're kind of focusing in on here is there is a real power dynamic that's present in teams and isn't often talked about, particularly when we have mixed teams, which is more often than not, that bring together both labor and management representatives. That happens at the school site. It happens in county offices of ed. It happens in negotiation teams, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're suggesting here is being honest about the power dynamic and the differential that sometimes exists, and talking about how to apply an equity lens to the work that would flatten teams so that more perspectives and different perspectives are raised up and at the table and also feel safe enough to actually express their voices. It's not enough to get people to the table. They have to be able to speak up at the table. So this is where the trust and communication or those other pillars of LMI come into place.
We have a question that we would like people to think about. And that is there really in your environment sufficient psychological safety to ensure that people do speak up and voice their ideas and opinions? And we'd like to take a few minutes for people to share some ideas in the chat. So think about it for a minute, and we look forward to seeing some ideas and thoughts about psychological safety in your district, in your union, in your collaborative team, in your partnership. Does it exist? Do people have the ability to speak up? And what can you do to change it?
And take a minute to think about this as well, right? These are, questions that really get to some of the underlying issues about, are we really able to have hard conversations? Can you really tell your supervisor that, maybe you think you got a better way to do this, or you don't understand something, or, why are we going down this road? Or did we have all the voices included? So please feel free to use the chat and give us your thoughts, and we'll reflect on those as well.
And it's fair to include in the chat a statement that says, I'm not sure that my district has psychological safety. It's something we have to work on so that we can move towards more collaboration. And if that is a hard thing to write, you don't have to write anything. But this is really an opportunity for that self-check to make sure that the people at the table truly have the space to be able to express honestly how things are working, how people are feeling, what changes need to be made, what may be working well, and opens up a conversation to realize that not everybody sees things from exactly the same lens. So as we're wrapping up our thoughts, I want to share a little story about me and Michael. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about how people work together and helping teams write plans that take their ideas to a better and highly functioning space in a way that helps everyone get on the same page. And what that work really made us think about was these plans, these activities that we're talking about, all of these conversations, the ability to work in groups, the ability to investigate ideas, the ability to seek out new resources, new facts, to talk about them in a way that solves a problem, reminded us of some standards and principle documents that exist in our state. And we're going to talk about really how all of us can be the Gandhis of our world and model the change that we want to see. Michael?
Jesse, can we go to the next slide?
Yep.
So we went in and looked at the state academic standards for students, and we also looked at the California Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, or CAPSLs, and tried to link them to some of these processes in this framework that we're presenting to you, and it really was pretty easy. So you see a couple of these referenced here. So in the science standards, that science and engineering practice 1 is about asking questions and defining problems, which links pretty well with identifying issues and talking about priorities. And the capsules really talk about, embracing diverse perspectives to craft consensus, or working with people to look at emerging trends and initiatives. And similarly, when we're looking at the power dynamics and how to address that, the capsules talk about setting clear working agreements and creating a safe and supportive environment, treating people with fairness and respect. And then the English language arts standards talk about bringing in a diversity and a range of conversations and explicitly talk about collaboration. These are the speaking and listening standards in the Common Core. So there's a lot of alignment, and you will see a tool that we have drafted that has guiding questions attached to our 6 steps for sustainable action, along with more of the standards that we found will potentially link here. So this is a tool that you can easily access. It's draft right now. We'd love to have some more input on it, but we want to really hammer home this point, which is, we need to model the behavior we want to see in the world. We already have standards that are asking us to do this with students. We even have standards that tell us how we might be acting as educational leaders. And now we can actually live into it in how we make decisions about prioritization and how we function in our teams, large and small, up and down the organization.
So there is a QRL code here that I think you can link to, as well as in the chat, there is a link to this draft document. So we seriously would love your feedback, and we encourage you to come up with your own connections to the state standards or other tools that you are using that connect. So
we're pushing on to steps 3 and 4. Step 3 is about doing the work, right? Now we all know, or we intuitively know, or through experience know, that one size fits all really doesn't work. That decisions get implemented differently and probably should get implemented differently depending on local context. What works in elementary school is probably not going to work without some adjustment at the secondary level, and vice versa. So doing the work here acknowledges that we need to trust the people who are closest to the action, closest to the students, closest to the families, closest to the schools, etc., to make the right kinds of decisions and to adjust implementation based on that local context. So we're back to that principle of trust again. Moreover, we know that there are multiple ways to do the work. Again, the standards are very effective here. One of the biggest changes in math is we're not telling kids that there's one way to solve problems. We're showing that there's at least 3 different ways to solve math problems, and all of them are legitimate. So we're living into that idea, and we're trying to show that we're testing and piloting ideas as we do the work so that we can get better quickly. Now, to do that, learning in real time, truly being formative, meaning we're guided and informed by our work and the results, means focusing on effectiveness. Now, there's a big difference between effectiveness and efficiency.
Sorry.
So efficiency is when we know we're on the right track and we're just trying to get more productive about it, more efficient. Can we do it faster? Can we do it cheaper? When we say focus on effectiveness, we need to ask ourselves a fundamentally different question. Are we focused on the right thing? Is what we're doing the right thing to be spending our time on? So this is why we call it honing precision while building trust, because we need to pull the team into this process and really figure out, is this where we need to get better? And if so, how do we get better? And how do we make sure that everyone is heard in that process? And the effectiveness takes time. It takes a lot more time and reflection. It requires some hard conversations, and it requires us to really think hard about outcome versus output. I'm going to give an example here. So a lot of our work in education comes down to training and professional development. And it is very important to train our staff so that they have the capacity to do the things that we're asking them to do. But just simply saying we've trained all the teachers in our district on, culturally responsive instruction is not really the most important thing. The outcome is, has that training actually transferred into the classroom? Is it manifest in different pedagogy and interactions with students? So we have to be careful that the output is easy. Counting how many people were trained is pretty easy, but the outcome, did it actually shift what's happening in a classroom, is very, very different, harder to measure, but much more meaningful. And that's what we mean by effectiveness. And so again, we're back to frank conversations and communications and a willingness to build the trust within teams to have those kinds of conversations. So our question here that was intended for a breakout is really, how do you move from kind of a culture that's based on reactivity and kind of quick decisions to one that's really cultivates curiosity and inquiry, that kind of withholds judgment right away and starts to get at, what else do we want to know? Do we have all the data and information that we have? Can we go deeper? How do we raise up the questions that people have that are maybe not the ones that we thought of?
So let's take a few minutes and let people write in the chat, since we don't have the breakout groups, and then we will move on to the next topic.
And if you're looking at the standards, what you'll find is that, it talks about the students doing investigations, doing analysis, and making evidence-based arguments. And similarly, the capsules, or the ones for adults, talk about a commitment to continuous improvement tied to review of evidence.
And we're trying to lift up that whole concept of psychological safety. So clearly, if you have a culture of curiosity and inquiry, you probably have a much more psychologically safe space for people to have frank and honest conversations.
I love some of the stuff in the chat about modeling, about kind of creating the right kind of conducive environment for this to happen, of kind of looking outside and not just be so internally focused. Really good comments in the chat. Thank you.
Prioritizing time, which is really important, and creating norms. Looking around for answers and not thinking that it's always just you. That's good. And I'm a big fan of food, so I love the food idea. I think social meetings are very effective. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to shift for a minute to talk about some tools. And in particular, we're going to talk about a concept that Simon Breakspear introduced in his webinar, which is capture, cleanse, and weave. And we think those concepts are really important as well to frame the way that we work and be able to really document the changes that we're all talking about. So first, regarding document and thinking about capturing what's important. Sometimes we capture things because it's been our tradition to jot down every word in the minutes, as opposed to capturing the decisions or the ideas that can help people move the work forward. Maybe we need to change the structure of our agendas so that we can talk about the things that are the most immediately important and move administrative conversations to a different format, perhaps even a chat as opposed to an actual voice-to-voice conversation. So we encourage you to think differently about how you capture what's important and that you truly do capture what is important. The second idea is to really think about what is important in this moment where things have been laid bare. How are we putting things in boxes and thinking about what we want to keep, what we want to get rid of, and what we want to do differently? We've shared with some of you on previous occasions a tool called the 3-box framework. You see it exhibited here, but if you go to the LMI website, you can get a framework that can help you think about, in this moment of clarity, what do you like about what you're doing? What do you want to build on? What is really outdated? And what new ideas do you really need to encourage people to come up with because you don't have good solutions right now? And lastly, after you've kind of captured what's important, you've filtered through the things that you need to be working on or getting rid of, how do you pull it all together to make something that's beautiful, that aligns with your LCAP, that aligns with your strategic plan, that everyone is on the same page about because they've been trained and given the information so that everyone is on the same page and you can all row together to create the collective impact that leads to good outcomes. We all know that individuals can do really good work alone, but to have true impact, we all need to row together towards the same mission and vision. So our last step builds on what we were just talking about. Building enduring systems requires that we capture the right things, that we share knowledge with each other so that when we get a change in our district, a change in our school, a change in our union leadership, we're not starting from scratch. We're building on the successes and making the changes from what we were doing before that may not have been as effective as we wanted it to be. So we encourage you to think about how can you use building systems to create better communication, to focus on more equity, and to foster trusting environments amidst constant change. So this is not just a challenge for administrators. This is about how each of us figures out our place in the system in an ongoing way and how we work with our colleagues in whichever structure, team, partnership that we're working on. I see that we're really rushing in time. So we have a question that we would have encouraged in a breakout. What small practice, an agenda change, the way that you document information, or the way that you train staff could have a really big impact on how you build enduring systems? Michael, let's move to our overview.
So today was an overview. We just wanted to get across some really big ideas and to kind of show you some potential for how to modify or think about ways to enhance labor management relationships, partnerships, and collaboration. We wanted to give you a sense of some of the steps that are involved in moving and sustaining the work. And we wanted to show you how the LMI principles of trust, equity, and communication can be manifest in that and be very intentional. So we haven't made as much of a case for prioritization, but we showed you some of the what. We know that there's a lot more to be said here. And in the future, we're going to offer some webinars that go very deep on these steps in the way in which they were clustered. So like the first 2 steps, we'll do a webinar, which probably will happen in January. So we hope we've whetted your appetite for, getting deeper into this work and have a kind of sense of this. Remember, we have that guide that we showcased to you that has more guiding questions, which we would love to have your input on and would like to see additions. And we also wanted to make sure that we linked some of this work to your existing standards, both at the student level and at the adult level. So stay tuned for future webinars that go a lot deeper, and you could get going right away now on some of this with your teams, and we'd love to hear how that work is going. And the last thing that we want to leave you with is, you know, we originally thought about actually entitling this presentation, Modeling the Change We Want to See. And this is a poem, and of course it's by Pat Mora, and it's about the impact that a teacher has on a child's life. And it reminds us of why we got into this profession, why we're doing this work, and how that modeling of the behavior by adults makes a huge difference in the life of a school and in the life of a child. So enjoy this poem. And then we look forward to the Q&A that you can either say aloud or put in the chat for us to respond to.
Awesome. Thank you, Ellen and Michael. So we do have a few questions that came up, and Jesse, if you're seeing, if you don't mind putting us in. Perfect. So a question from Tim Brooks, which was really interesting, is he brought up the idea of collective questioning. So perhaps a step before prioritization. So I was wondering where you thought the idea of questioning and encouraging questioning and modeling question fits into the model.
Michael, you want to start, and then I'll give some additional thoughts? Because my big idea is it's at every level. You go.
I think the nature of the question for me is we need to front load it. We need to model it up front, and we need to convince people as we're crafting our priorities and as we're acknowledging and trying to flatten the decision making in those first two steps. I think that's an ideal place to really model repeatedly the types of questions that are permissible and actually the types of questions that are desirable for this kind of process to work. It would require leaders to be very vulnerable and to showcase kind of the questions that have been in the back of their minds and push them to the forefront and to demonstrate some vulnerability in order to encourage others to step forward. I agree with Ellen that it's probably a good thing to have that robust questioning all the way through. I can see it happening a lot in the effectiveness conversation as well. But I think if we don't do it up front, it's going to be hard to do it later on.
I agree. But I do think it's also really important to think about being curious and asking questions at every level, because sometimes we make assumptions about the effectiveness of what we're doing, for example, and we think that something is running really smoothly because from my personal perspective, it is. But when you start asking other people, maybe the information you get shows that your perspective didn't have all the information you could have had if you allowed the group to truly be curious and ask questions.
Yeah, it reminds me of the era of empowerment coming on Dolan's collaborative structures, right? That building the empowerment through questioning. So so Debbie was asking, how might we move past the limits of titles or power structures to create higher feelings of equity of voice at the table?
So we grapple with this issue all the time. And I think that part of it is you have to build personal relationships. You have to invest the time in getting to know people. And sometimes that little trick that was mentioned earlier about having a meal together, eating food together, breaks down the titles because everybody enjoys a good cup of coffee or a cookie or, something. The other, and I know that sounds very simplistic, but I think that the more that we all recognize the value and diversity of ideas, it will help us allow for more voices at the table, and the role that people play or the title they play is less important than the ideas and perspective that they share and how that contributes to the success of the decision. Michael, I know you have some thoughts.
I would say two things. One is working with Ellen, I've learned that it's really important to create the right tone at the beginning of meetings and to get people to be thinking beyond their kind of professional role and kind of hear more of who they are as a person. So like Ellen and I did meetings together where we started with icebreaker questions like, what would we find you doing on a Saturday morning? Or what's the household chore that you really are the one that you're going to procrastinate on the most or just outsource altogether? And it was very revealing because people started to see each other in a slightly different way, other than kind of their hierarchical relationships. The other aspect of this, I think it's really important, is to take people who are in the middle of the organization and actually put them first. Like instead of having the people at the top of the existing hierarchy kind of set the table or create the agendas or kind of be the first ones to respond to questions, instead have people that are much closer to the line staff or line staff themselves begin to be the ones who put stuff out first. So it's a symbolic way to kind of showcase that we're doing things differently and we want to hear from people that are closer to the action. And we're going to hold back as leaders that are at the higher elevation until we hear from those voices first.
I also think, Michael, based on what you were just talking about, we cannot overlook the importance of communication and building a communication design and structure that makes it clear what you're working on, that shares ideas with each other, that's very clear about the limits of authority and when you're asking someone to help you with a decision or when you just want input. All of those levels of communication help create better working relationships and are essential to breaking down these barriers that titles create.
Awesome. I'm going to start the polling. So we asked that all participants participate in the poll, but I do have one last question for Ellen and Michael before you go. Maybe we have time. We have 1 minute, maybe a one word or a phrase, but where should a team start if they're having daily fires, if, you know, a lot going on, obviously, but where should a team start?
Ooh, that's a toughie, but I think that the first thing to do is to sit at a table with each other with some cookies and maybe talk about this document and ask what people think about some of these guiding questions, or use a tool that helps you have a framed conversation instead of having a conversation about each other.
For me, in the most conflictual environments, it's always helpful to kind of go back to people and hear from them directly, and in a very straightforward way. Why did you get into this profession in the first place? And to remind yourself of that, it is really about how do we kind of create the best possibilities for teaching and learning to occur, and for families to really be authentically engaged with their children. And that puts people back in the right frame of mind and maybe helps them respond to issues rather than react to issues.
That is great, because it really is all about the children, the students. But I don't want to discount also that we want to make sure that all of these places are great places to work. They're great places for our students, and they're great places for all of us to live out our visions, our dreams, and ideas for being the best kinds of professionals that we can be.
Thank you. And with that, thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Michael. We really, really appreciate your time. I found that really useful. Probably can use it outside of my organization as well. So with that, we're going to bring in Ed to wrap us up here.
Thank you all for a little grace while we had some technical challenges and our breakout rooms weren't working the way we were hoping they were going to work. I also want to kind of point to a couple things here, one of which is an opportunity to see a whole lot more content from the Labor Management Initiative. There's a QR code and a bit.ly down there where you can link to a number of videos that we captured both from our summit, our virtual summit this summer, as well as a variety of speakers from Michael Fullen to Andy Hargraves. Those are available on that YouTube channel for LMI. The link is there, and the QR code. And so feel free to grab your camera and shoot that QR code. You could also just go to the LMI website and you'll find that information. I did want to also mention that, we have additional opportunities to engage coming up. We really would like for you to reach out to Gustavo and myself if you have an interest in, if you're new to the Labor Management Initiative and would like to learn more, think about how you can get involved, bring a labor management team to some of our events. We'll be reconvening virtually for a while here, obviously, but we'll have a variety of ways that you can engage. And again, we really appreciate you taking the time, spending the afternoon with us. We know that people are busy. I really encourage you to take a look at that tool and the links, the guiding questions, and particularly the connections to the California standards, of the California professional leadership standards, because we think that's a powerful driver and helps place us back at the center of all this, which is how do we do things that are impactful and make a difference in the lives of students and staff. So again, thank you all for joining us. We'll have more information for you coming up shortly. And I hope all of you have a great afternoon here. And thank you for the great work you do supporting students in the state of California.